Karam and the Mystery of the Lost Sun. Chapter 1. The Disappearing Sun. In the city of Matalma, the sun shone only 2 small hours a day. Then it vanished behind the horizon, leaving the inhabitants in an endless night. The children barely had time to run outside before the darkness forced them to return home. The flowers remained dull and fragile, lacking light to bloom fully. The streets, once lively, were silent and bathed in a strange melancholy. But Karam, a curious and lively boy, refused to accept this fate. He raised his eyes to the dark sky and asked, "Why is the sun abandoning us?" He asked the market merchants. "That's just how it is, my boy," sighed one of them. Then he asked the school teachers. "No one really knows," replied an old master in a thoughtful tone. Even the mayor of the city had no answer. So Karam went to see his grandfather Ali, the wisest of all. Ali stroked his beard, thinking deeply. "When I was little, the sun shone from morning to evening," he murmured. "But one day it began to disappear, little by little." "Why?" cried Karam. Ali shrugged his shoulders. "That, my boy, no one remembers." Chapter 2. A Forgotten Clue. Karam didn't like mysteries without answers, so he decided to search for the truth himself. He questioned the elders of the village, scanned the streets in search of a clue, and even rummaged through the old school archives. But nothing. One afternoon, as he wandered near the abandoned library, a strange sensation made him shiver, as if a forgotten secret was calling to him from inside. Cautiously, he placed his hand on the large wooden door, covered in dust. It creaked open. Inside, rows of books covered in cobwebs waited to be read. The air smelled of old paper and dried ink. Attracted by a book resting on a podium, Karam flipped through it and began to read. At that very moment, something strange happened. Through the cracked window, the sun lingered longer than usual. Karam, absorbed in his reading, didn't notice it immediately. Looked up, he frowned. "That's strange. It should already be dark." Intrigued, he came back the next day and opened another book. And once again, the sun stayed a little longer. Day after day, he repeated the experiment, and each time the light gained time. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Power of Stories. After several days of observation, he made an incredible discovery in a very old book. In Matalma, light and knowledge are linked. The more minds awaken, the more the sun shines. But if the inhabitants stop learning and imagining, the shadow will take their place. Karam then understood that there was a connection between books and the sunlight. But why? How could stories influence daylight? He kept reading, devouring every page as if it contained the key to the mystery. He found ancient stories talking about a time when Matalma was bathed in light and knowledge. There was once a great tradition where every evening the inhabitants gathered to read and share tales. But one day this tradition was lost. Little by little, people forgot the importance of stories. They became too busy to read, too preoccupied with their daily lives to tell tales. And that was when the sun began to disappear. Karam felt a shiver run down his spine. The sun didn't vanish by chance, he murmured. He then realized that as long as stories lived, the light shone, but when stories were forgotten, the shadow took their place. If this was true, then maybe there was a way to bring the sun back. But how could he make an entire village start reading and telling stories again? Chapter 4. Karam's Mission. Karam knew he couldn't do it alone. He went back to see his grandfather Ali. "Grandfather, I have discovered why the sun is disappearing," he cried. Ali gave him a kind look. "Then tell me what you have learned, my boy." Karam told him everything. The forgotten tales, the stories that made the sun shine, and how reading seemed to prolong the light. Ali listened in silence, then slowly nodded. "If this is true, then we must awaken the sleeping stories." "But how?" asked Karam, frowning. Ali smiled and placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Start small, my boy. Find those who want to listen," Karam thought. Suddenly, an idea sprouted in his mind. He started with the children of the village. He went to his friends and told them about the secret he had discovered. "I will tell you a story, and you will see the sun will stay a little longer." At first they laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when they gathered and listened to Karam read a wonderful tale, they looked up at the sky and saw that the daylight lasted longer. The children were amazed. "Tell us another story, Karam," he continued, day after day, and the more they read and shared stories, the longer the light lingered in the sky. One morning, an old woman from the village noticed something strange. "That's strange. Isn't it staying light longer?" The adults started to wonder, and when Karam explained his secret, some were skeptical, but others started reading too. Little by little, books came out of cupboards. The old tales were rediscovered, and every evening groups of villagers gathered to listen and tell stories. The lanterns were lit later. The children played longer outside, and the sun shone a little longer every day. Chapter 5, The Return of Light. One morning, for the first time in years, the sun did not disappear after 2 hours. The inhabitants looked up, amazed. The light had finally returned. Karam, exhausted but happy, looked at his grandfather Ali. Ali gave him a knowing wink. "Words are powerful treasures, my boy. Never forget that." Since that day, in Matalma, every evening the inhabitants gathered to read and tell stories, because as long as stories lived, the light would never fade. And the sun never left the sky of Matalma again.